Welcome back, radio entrepreneurs, listeners, and fans. I'm producer Nathan Gobes, filling in for Jeffrey Davis this morning, and I want to thank you all for joining. We have at my side John Dustin of J.E.D. Insurance. Welcome, John.
Morning, Nathan. Glad to be back, and this looks like it's going to be a great interview.
I agree. Thank you for co-hosting with me. It's always good to have you at my side. Our next guest is Jorge Elizondo, CTO and co-founder of Heila Technologies. Welcome, Jorge.
Good morning. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for inviting.
Yes, happy to have you on the show. Why don't you tell us about what you're doing and what your company is all about?
Absolutely. So Heila is a company that started in 2015 out of MIT. I did my PhD at MIT in microgrid control and microgrid optimization. And microgrids are systems of that combine, energy generation, energy storage, and energy consumption. So if you have, for example, a house with solar panels, batteries that you can connect or disconnect from the grid, that will be considered a microgrid. Also, or projects are usually a combination of many different houses or larger applications, commercial, industrial typically. So that was my research at MIT. How do you control systems like that? We created Heila in 2015 to simplify the construction, operation, and optimization of these systems. We started as a combination of strong theoretical knowledge and field experience, where we discovered that these systems are very hard to build. There's a lot of complexity in there.
And Jorge, is this, I've been kind of following the grid thing that everybody talks about, that we're putting too much stress on the grid. Is this anything related to that?
Correct. Because, when you build microgrids, you start putting what is called distributed energy resources into the grid. These are resources that are not centralized like a power plant, where you have, one big location of energy generation. But you have it all over the place, and it's usually very close to the consumption. So that brings a lot of advantages. For example, you lose way less energy in transmitting the energy from one place to another, but it also creates complexities, because now instead of having a few power plants, in the hundreds, thousands maybe, that you have to manage, now you have millions of resources that are doing their own thing, right? And there's effects that they put on the grid, and that stresses the grid. You can think of if everybody installs solar panels in their house, for example, or in their commercial building, there's going to be a lot of generation in the day, right? More than we know what to do with it. And then in the evening, there's no generation, and power plants have to ramp up very quickly, and sometimes they can't. And they start creating this phenomenon, right? There's something that is called the dog curve. So by actually coordinating and controlling the resources, these millions of resources that are installed in the grid, you don't have this problem. You can avoid these problems and have a much more resilient and efficient grid.
Some of these big providers, I'm sorry, Nathan, some of the big providers, I think, in high use areas, do they drop during peak hours some of the electricity flow to keep everything under control? Because you hear that sometimes where people will say, "Oh, my stuff went off for a second or two," or whatever.
Yeah, it's a big problem for them, right? Now, I think that places where there's more solar penetration still are, in the maybe 20, 30%, and that's still manageable. But if we go to 50, 70, 80% solar penetration, like everybody has solar, then the rules needs to change, right? Right now, we're operating under this premise in most places, not everybody, but in a lot of places, this premise of net metering, meaning that you just install solar panels in your house, you send the energy to the grid, and you essentially use the grid as a big battery, right? But that's certainly not sustainable. I'm a full proponent of net metering and incentives for solar, but as we have more and more, we need to start adding energy storage and control, so that we can coordinate these resources.
Are you in Massachusetts, your firm?
The company is in Massachusetts and California. So we are actually, the team is split. I'm in California right now, although I did start in Massachusetts. And 2/3 of the company approximately are in Massachusetts.
Because Massachusetts, I believe, is doing away with their tax credit for solar, or there's some reduction in it. So it's kind of interesting. You're talking about using it more and they're taking away some of the benefit.
Correct, correct. So there's certainly some changes that are coming for tax credits and incentives. But I think most governments, most states recognize the importance of solar. So it's just finding a way to actually incentivize solar while also incentivizing something like energy storage and management. I think management is the key, actually. That's why we work what we do. That's what we do, right? We bring management to the edge of the grid so that we can coordinate all these resources.
So if we could step back so our listeners get a better understanding of what it is you guys do. You were just talking about management. That's the piece that you step in. Are you selling like a control box, or what exactly does your organization do for the grid?
Yeah, so Heila Technologies is a combination of hardware and software. Our product is hardware and software. So we sell a controller that is installed in front of or next to each DER, and we bring intelligence to these DERs. So in a sense, our vision is that DERs, and by the way, by DERs, I mean distributed energy resources. So these numerous solar panels, batteries, consumption control, like load control, HVACs, or whatever you want to control, we make them intelligent, right? With our controller, so they can they can interact with other resources and form systems in that way. That's very different from the typical approach where there's a centralized control that tries to manage everything. We actually distribute the intelligence, and we form systems. We have created systems of a lot of different forms and shapes, because by distributed intelligence, you have building blocks. Essentially, each resource becomes a building block that can interact with others and force it, and create systems like that. So it's very flexible and very agnostic to any topology.
Jorge, is your customer residential or commercial, and what distribution system are you using?
So we have projects that are residential, although not a single house. It's usually we have it's a collection of residences. And actually, just last week I was in Tampa, Florida, because we're finalizing a project in there where there is 40 homes. Every single home has its own battery, and there's also community resources, right? And all together forms a microgrid. So it can disconnect all together from the grid. There can be sharing between the houses, and we also manage the community resources so they are fairly used by everyone. So we have done those kind of projects. There's aggregation of residential, but most of our projects are actually commercial industrial. So a little bit or larger sizes, where there's solar plus storage plus some load control typically, and we manage that for the customer.
And how are you finding the customers? Are they coming to you, or you have sales reps or internet? What's your sales model?
And if I can add to that question, obviously, we've talked about the benefits to the grid and the community. I'm curious what benefits are to the end user. If let's say I'm a business owner with solar panels on my company's roof, for example, or a battery, what brings me to Heila?
Yes, absolutely. So let me tackle both questions. The first one is, how do we find the projects? And we rarely go to the end customer. We sell usually through 3 main channels. One is project developers. So we work with a lot of people that actually find the end customer and say, I need to build a system here, and I need control. And they bring us in, right? So that's a typical approach. The second is utilities. We have agreements with certain utilities to do the projects. For example, the Tampa project that I just mentioned is actually with a utility. And we're working with the utility to deploy this. So utilities is number 2. And number 3, the third channel is equipment vendors. So we work, for example, with battery companies that are pulled into projects by project developers or by end customers, and we provide the control, right? We cannot make this equipment intelligent. Then regarding your question of the benefits, so each one of these channels has incentives to work with us, right? And there's benefits for project developers, there's benefits for utilities, and there's benefits for equipment vendors. The end customer, of course, also benefits. And that goes usually into energy savings. Well, actually, sorry about energy savings and resiliency. That's the most important aspects. Energy savings for residential is complicated because there's flat tariffs usually, or flat rates, meaning that they pay the same amount for the energy at any time of the day. But that's not true for commercial industrial, where they have what is called time of use, meaning they pay more for energy at certain times of the day than on others. And in those cases, the value of energy storage becomes very important because you can shift your consumption from one time to another. And then commercial and industrial customers also have what is called demand charges. They pay for the peak of their power consumption, right? So the maximum that they consume in a given interval, usually 15 minutes, they pay for that peak for the entire month, right? So if you maintain your peak low, you can save a lot of money. And for commercial and industrial, usually the costs are half and half for the demand charge, half for the energy. So that's the energy save or the savings, right? More economic incentives to do this. The second one is resiliency. And we have been seeing in California, for example, having extended blackouts for something that is called public safety power shutdowns, which is shutdowns of the grid to avoid fires. And that has caused a lot of blackouts, right? And then we saw Texas in the winter having also extended shutdowns and blackouts. And if you see the trend, we're seeing more and more blackouts occurring. So a lot of people are looking for resiliency. A common solution has been just using a diesel generator in the house, right? But we're trying, there's an alternative, is using solar plus storage, something that you use all the time instead of just using when the grid is down. So those benefits of economic impact and resiliency is very powerful for a lot of people and in some markets.
It's interesting because I think at least, I don't know if you guys remember this, years ago, like Enron tried to lock in the cost of the off hour, peak hour, something, almost like lock it in so that other companies couldn't get access to it. And I think that backfired on people. So, wow, you're really ahead of this whole, and it's probably got some good, what do they call it, green environment results too, so that people
Absolutely.
aren't wasting energy.
Yeah, and that goes into the third benefit, which, as much as we like it, it's a little bit harder to sell it. Is the environmental impact, right? If you have solar in your house, you're certainly producing electricity with 0 emissions, and that's important. And then you can use it for your own consumption. You can sell into the grid so that your neighbors use it. You can charge your EV with solar, and if you have batteries, you can actually use your solar through the entire day and night. So certainly environmental aspects are important, although we see that the most important aspect to make a decision are either economic or resiliency. But I think as climate change becomes more and more critical, I think the environmental aspect will become also more important in the decision makers.
Certainly feeds into the questions behind resiliency and a lot of the issues that are caused there. So
absolutely, it's all interrelated.
Well, thank you, Jorge. This was really interesting to learn about, and we'd love to have you come back and tell us more as Heila continues to grow and expand. If listeners or viewers want to get in touch with you, find out how they can utilize the technology, how could they do so?
Yeah, well, I mean, they can reach us at our email or our website, heilatech.com, and we have a contact page there. And if someone is interested, I'm happy to also receive an email at J.E.Elizondo@heilatech.com. We're always looking for interested people and in this space for partnerships, for collaborations, to sell them projects. Whatever we can find, we're always open. This has to be a an effort that is done as a community, right? Everybody has to participate. If we want to solve this big challenge that we have that is modernizing the grid with renewables, so that we tackle the climate change problem as well.
Great.
So yeah, happy to receive any comments or questions from listeners.
Yeah, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And John Dustin, J.E.D. Insurance, my reliable co-host. How can people reach you if they want to get in touch?
By phone, 508-543-1067, on the web at www.jedinsurance.com, or if you prefer, email john.dustin@jedinsurance, all one word.com.
Great. Thanks. And I want to thank again our listeners and viewers for tuning in. Of course, you can find this on our website, radioentrepreneurs.com, as well as YouTube. Please subscribe and hit the bell button there to get notifications for when we post more interviews. Of course, we're also a growing community on LinkedIn, Facebook, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. This has been Radio Entrepreneurs. We'll be back with another segment after this break.